The sun crawls over the horizon, a new day breaks, and a new shiny Pokémon is released in Pokémon Go. It's a tale as old as 8 years ago, when Magikarp and Gyarados kickstarted the dawn of shiny Pokémon in Pokémon Go in March of 2017. And it's wild to look back at the past 8 years and study the history of these releases. Just look at the distribution over the years. Niantic took their time introducing the mechanic with just 14 releases in 2017, followed by a rocket ship to the moon in 2018, with 130 shiny Pokémon introduced. And in 2019, continuing to accelerate with 183 shinies. But then, possibly fueled by the pandemic, or perhaps the realization that there are, in fact, a finite number of shiny Pokémon, they pulled back, with 117 in 2020, followed by just 87 in 2021, but then picking back up to around 100 over each of the next 3 years. 2025 is shaping up to have the lowest total output of shiny releases since the first year they were introduced. We're currently sitting on just 50, which, without knowing exactly what the rest of the year looks like, puts us on pace to have around 60 new shinies in 2025. Is this a change in philosophy from the game's new ownership? I don't know. But rather than speculating on unknowns, no pun intended, I instead wanted to take a deeper look at the history of shiny releases. Because every new shiny Pokémon tells a story, and some of those stories feel like they've been forgotten. And one Pokémon, well, is a mystery that you simply won't believe. These are the forgotten shiny Pokémon in Pokémon Go. Imagine, if you will, that the details for a major Pokémon Go event have just been announced. You're combing through them, come to the section for event spawns, and find yourself skimming through many familiar names. Dratini, Larvitar, Beldum, Bagon, Eevee, and Pikachu is always in there. Heck, we probably can't go 6 months without them being featured in events. They're the Pokémon that are either immensely popular, incredibly useful, or both. Pokémon who, in addition to having had boosted shiny odds at their respective community days, are continually highlighted, so any players who may have taken a break or just picked up the game can get caught up on the important things that they've missed. Then you have Pokémon who may not be featured as frequently, but have, since their shiny release, always had boosted shiny odds of 1 in 64. Pokémon like Chansey, Scyther, Mawile, Gible, and Skarmory. While they may not be as commonly featured as the prior group, they don't elicit much excitement when they are. Then you have Pokémon who don't have boosted shiny odds and aren't regularly featured, but still have been featured enough times that most people probably already have their shinies. Pokémon like Golett, Carvanha, Solrock, and Lunatone. But when you take these 3 categories and filter them out from the more than 1,000 shiny Pokémon in Pokémon Go, what you are left with are the forgotten shinies. The Pokémon whose shinies were technically released at some point in the past, but are almost never featured, never boosted, obtained by few, and in some cases, missing in action entirely. I've broken these Pokémon into 3 categories: mostly forgotten, in Pokémon Jail, and Cold Case. Let's begin. First, we have Pokémon that, while not unusually rare, they're almost never featured in events, have never been shiny boosted, and while they're still technically huntable, they would be incredibly challenging for most players to actively pursue. The Lake Legends event of November 2020 saw the global release of the Lake Guardians, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, in their respective regions. But tucked away in this event was the release of Shiny Goldeen and Shiny Sea King. Not the most aesthetically pleasing shinies, but in the 5 years since their release, they have never been featured in any major events, never been given a chance to hunt with boosted odds, largely forgotten by the game. In the lead up to the Pokémon Go Johto Tour, ticket holders were given the choice between gold and silver versions of the event, with each version offering an array of Pokémon with boosted shiny odds. In terms of new shiny releases, this effectively meant choosing between either Mantine for gold or Phanpy for silver. At the time, I thought this was a no-brainer. With Phanpy being a fairly common spawn and Mantine being an incredibly rare spawn, I chose gold so I could get the Mantine. But oh, how wrong I was. Because what I couldn't have known at the time was that the moment this event ended, Phanpy would be relegated to the Shadow Realm. Mantine, along with its baby form Mantike, have been featured in several events over the years, while Phanpy has mostly been forgotten, rarely featured, and has never been part of an event with boosted shiny odds. And finally, in the mostly forgotten tier, we have Finneon. Introduced in November 2022 at the Pokémon Go Safari Zone in Taipei City, Shiny Finneon was introduced to players fortunate enough to live near or travel to Taiwan, before returning to his status as an uncommon, mostly forgotten about Pokémon that is almost never featured in events. This is the first Pokémon on this list that I personally don't have, though funnily enough I have been able to find a shiny in Pokémon Legends Arceus. This tier would also fit the fossil Pokémon Tortuga, but it was highlighted with boosted shiny odds earlier this year. Pokémon Jail is for the Pokémon whose rarity is tied to some external reasoning with the Pokémon itself. Pokémon Go's Halloween event has always been a fan favorite. Double candy, Pokémon dressed in their Halloween best. But the Halloween 2020 event introduced something we could never have known would become so rare. Shiny Spiritomb. But not only was it introduced into the game, you could actually hunt it. See, in the years since its initial release, Spiritomb has returned to the game several times, usually for subsequent Halloween events. But whenever it does, it's always in a special research that only allows players to check one per event, one per year. But for the Halloween event in 2020, Spiritomb was just in regular field research. Catch 18 dark types, catch 18 ghost types. That was it. It was easy, and I fondly remember picking up research tasks until finally getting my blue and purple ghost, with no idea how this shiny Pokémon would taunt other players with its rarity for years to come. And speaking of ghosts, there's Shedinja, whose shiny released in October of 2022 in a redesign of research breakthroughs. Like Spiritomb, Shedinja periodically pops up, but usually for Halloween and usually with only one encounter. Also, it's useless and the shiny is objectively terrible. Sorry, Shedinja. But besides Halloween relevance, there are other ways of locking a shiny Pokémon to obscurity. Game mechanics. Shiny Kecleon was released as part of the Pokémon Go Hoenn Tour in February 2023. And it's still technically available to hunt in the game. The problem is that encountering Kecleon means happening upon a Pokestop that he happens to be hiding at. Speaking from personal experience, I would say I run into a Kecleon maybe once every 2 weeks. And with encounters that infrequent, it makes it challenging to pursue or even find significant data on its shiny odds. Most of the shiny Kecleon hypotheses state that it is full odds, 1 in 512. But with encounters being as rare as they are, it's immaterial for most players. And rounding out the Pokemon Prison tier, we have one that you could argue is too soon to declare, White Striped Basculin. Since its release at the Pokemon Go Sinnoh Tour in early 2024, the White Striped Basculin has made appearances on routes, in eggs, and in eggs that can only be obtained on routes. Its history in the game has mostly been gimmicky, hard to reliably find, and we'll keep an eye out on whether this Pokemon ever gets out of Pokemon Jail. The trail has gone cold. No witnesses, no leads. Nothing that points to these shiny Pokemon ever seeing the light of day again. These are the Cold Case Shinies. December 1st, 2022. The usual update to the research breakthrough encounters brings one interesting caveat. Shiny Galarian Mr. Mime. Galarian Mr. Mime has had a contentious history in Pokemon Go, since first being introduced via a paid research ticket, viewed by many as a harbinger of microtransactions to come, if you will. And the release of shiny Galarian Mr. Mime hasn't done much to improve his status among players. Sometimes he's included as a rare research reward. He occasionally makes an appearance around winter holiday events, only sometimes they just forget to include him. So while players know they will at least see one Spiritomb for Halloween, with Galarian Mr. Mime it depends on if anyone remembers he even exists. And all this for a creepy Pokemon with a terrible shiny. But there is one evolutionary line in Pokemon Go whose shiny was released and was more forgotten than all the others. And you won't believe why. Cherubi. Along with his evolution, Cherum, had their shinies released in both its Sunshine and regular forms in April of 2022 as part of an event highlighting Sustainability Week in Pokemon Go. Now, no one would blame you if you weren't aware that these shinies were released or available. Cherubi, despite not technically being a baby Pokémon, is treated as one, and occasionally made available in 7-kilometer eggs, usually amongst other baby Pokémon. For a long time, it wasn't a regular encounter spawn at all, though technically it can be. And Cherum, once a common spawn in the game, mostly disappeared once its shiny was released. It isn't featured in events and has virtually disappeared from the game entirely. The question is why? Why did the developers make Cherubi and Cherum's shinies available and then completely forget about them? Well, I think I found the reason, and it will blow your mind. Exhibit A. Cherubi and Cherum shinies were released at the Sustainability Week event in 2022 on April 20th. 420. Exhibit B. Cherubi's Pokédex number? 420. What typing are Cherubi and Cherum? Grass. Exhibit D. This all happened while Pokémon Go was still run by Niantic, whose headquarters are in San Francisco. And what's legal in San Francisco? And what are the effects of ingesting marijuana? Impaired short-term memory. I've seen enough here. I'm ready to report my findings. On April 20th, 2022, Niantic released Shiny Cherubi and Shiny Cherum, but they were so high that they forgot they even did it, or perhaps they forgot it existed at all. In May of this year, Niantic sold Pokémon Go to Scopely, whose parent company, Savvy Games Group, is based in Saudi Arabia, where marijuana is highly illegal. And oh look, there's Cherubi, a featured spawn at the Wild Area, the next major event in the game. Well, we can close the book on this one, Johnson. Thanks for watching and stay safe out there, trainers.